Alice Johnson, a UN diplomat, fell victim to blatant prejudice. Her passport was torn apart, labeled as fake, and she was humiliated in front of a crowd, all because of the color of her skin. But what happened next stunned even the most seasoned observers. Let's start from the beginning. Alice Johnson, dressed in a formal suit and carrying a diplomatic briefcase, approaches the passport control desk at one of the world's largest international airports. Her destination is a pivotal UN conference on human rights, where she is scheduled to deliver a report on systemic racism. On the flight board, her plane is listed to depart in 2 hours. "Good morning," Alice says with a professional smile, handing over her passport. The immigration officer, a white man in his 50s with a weary expression, picks up the document, scrutinizes it, and frowns. "Something doesn't match," he says. "Hold on a moment." Sensing trouble, Alice remains calm and replies, "It's a diplomatic passport." Everything is in order. But instead of completing the check, the officer calls over his junior colleague. Together they begin discussing the passport, exchanging glances and whispering audibly. A moment later, the junior officer turns to Alice. "We believe your document is fake," he says coldly. "This passport doesn't look authentic." "Excuse me?" Alice arches an eyebrow in surprise. "Are you serious? This is an official UN passport." "Ma'am, we know what authentic documents look like," the senior officer replies with a touch of sarcasm. Pulling out a pair of scissors, he adds, "You'll need to come with us for further investigation." Right in front of stunned passengers, he cuts off the corner of the passport, leaving a deep gash. The crowd begins to murmur, and one passenger pulls out their phone to record the incident. "This is outrageous!" Alice exclaims, her anger barely restrained. "You've destroyed my passport. Call your supervisor immediately." "Lower your voice, ma'am," the officer replies coldly. "Step aside." Surrounded by several police officers, Alice is pressured to follow them despite her protests. Meanwhile, murmurs in the waiting area grow louder. "This is racism. She's done nothing wrong," someone shouts from the crowd. "I saw her come through. Everything was fine." "She's a diplomat," another passenger yells. But the officers ignore the commotion. Alice attempts to retrieve her phone to contact the UN headquarters, but her movement is brusquely interrupted by the junior officer. "Put that down. No calls allowed." Meanwhile, someone in the crowd uploads the video to social media. Though humiliated in front of dozens of people, Alice maintains her composure outwardly, even as a storm rages inside her. She knows this is more than just a mistake. It's a confrontation, and she refuses to back down. Alice is taken to a small interrogation room. 3 police officers surround her while the immigration officer stands by the door with a smug expression. "Your documents are suspicious," the senior officer declares, nodding toward the damaged passport. "We need to determine who you really are," the officer says. "I've already told you," Alice responds, her voice calm despite the simmering anger beneath. "I am a UN diplomat. You can contact my office. All relevant details are in my documents." The officer smirks. "Sure, that's what old fraudsters say." Alice watches as her phone and personal belongings are confiscated and placed into a plastic bag. Left alone in the room, she sits in silence as the officers claim to verify her identity. Meanwhile, the video of the passport control incident is going viral on social media. Outrage spreads quickly as viewers express their shock and support for Alice. A journalist from a major news outlet sees the footage and begins tracking her down to break the story nationally. Half an hour later, the door opens, and a young officer with a cautious expression enters. "Ma'am, we're waiting for confirmation of your identity. You'll need to stay here in the meantime. It's standard procedure." "Standard procedure." Alice raises an eyebrow. "You've destroyed my passport and accused me of fraud without evidence. This is not standard procedure, it's blatant bias." The officer avoids her gaze and says nothing, leaving the room. Alice feels her patience wearing thin. Back in the waiting area, the tension is rising. A crowd has gathered, demanding answers from airport officials. Shouts of, "We saw you humiliate that woman," echo through the space. Reporters, having caught wind of the viral video, arrive at the airport to cover the unfolding scandal. One of them identifies Alice as a high-ranking UN representative. An hour later, a call reaches the UN headquarters from Alice's assistant, who managed to receive a message she sent before being detained. The UN swiftly mobilizes, sending official requests to the airport, contacting international agencies, and alerting the media. At the same time, an airport representative approaches the room where Alice is being held. He looks flustered, adjusting his tie nervously. "Miss Johnson, we apologize for the delay," he begins. "We are waiting for confirmation." "Delay?" Alice's voice cuts like steel. "You've destroyed my document, publicly humiliated me, and cut off my communication. This isn't a delay, it's a violation of every possible protocol." Just then, the doors to the room swing open, and Alice sees the lens of a news camera. A journalist has managed to get inside, holding a microphone out to her. "Miss Johnson, could you comment on what has happened?" the reporter asks. The police and airport staff look panicked, but it's too late. The truth has started to emerge. Before the reporter and cameraman, Alice lifts her head and speaks directly into the camera with determination. "I am Alice Johnson, a UN diplomat. What you are witnessing is not a mistake, but a blatant act of prejudice. I demand that the authorities immediately explain their actions." Her words resonate with strength and conviction, despite the humiliation she endured. At that moment, an airport representative bursts into the room with several security officers. "You can't be here!" he shouts at the reporter, trying to push him out. "It's too late," the journalist replies. "This is already live." Meanwhile, in the waiting area, tensions reach a boiling point as passengers chant, "Justice for Alice." Airport officers attempt to call for reinforcements, but their efforts to disperse the crowd only fuel the unrest. Passengers hold their phones high, recording every action. Within minutes, the situation escalates to the highest levels of the UN. The Secretary General, alerted by the flood of notifications about the incident, immediately contacts the country's government, demanding swift intervention. Two men in formal suits, consulate representatives, enter the room where Alice is being detained. They present their credentials and assert, "Miss Johnson is under diplomatic protection. We demand her immediate release and a full account of this incident," the consulate representative declares firmly. The police officers look stunned. The senior officer, who earlier destroyed her passport, struggles to find words. "This was standard procedure, perhaps a mistake," he stammers. "A mistake?" the consulate representative retorts with sarcasm. "You have violated the Vienna Convention, unlawfully detained a diplomat, destroyed her document, and publicly humiliated her. This will be taken to international courts." The crowd outside hears the raised voices and erupts into applause, cheering in support of the consul's words. The police and control officers begin to back away. Meanwhile, the video of Alice's treatment at passport control spreads like wildfire on social media. Comments pour in, demanding accountability and reforms. The hashtag #Justice for Alice skyrockets to the top of trending topics. The airport's senior officer, realizing the severity of the situation, attempts to explain himself to the press. However, as soon as he steps into the crowd, reporters bombard him with questions. "Why did you detain a diplomat? What disciplinary actions will be taken against your staff?" they demand. Finally, Alice is released. She walks through the airport corridors escorted by consulate representatives. When she emerges to the crowd, passengers greet her with applause and words of encouragement. Alice raises her hand to quiet the crowd and delivers a brief but powerful speech. "This is about more than one incident," she begins. Today, we've seen an example of systemic bias that people face all over the world. I thank you for your support, but we must use this moment to fight for justice. Her words spread rapidly across social media, and reporters capture every moment. Alice knows this is only the beginning of a larger battle. The next day, the airport incident dominates global news. Videos of Alice's mistreatment appear on major television networks, and world leaders condemn the actions of the police and immigration officials. The UN demands formal apologies and comprehensive reforms of the country's immigration services. An internal investigation begins at the airport. The officers involved are suspended, and the senior officer who tore Alice's passport faces charges of violating international law. Public outrage grows, with the hashtag number Justice for Alice remaining a top trend on social media. Alice speaks at a press conference stating, "This is not just about my experience. Thousands face similar injustices every day. We must fight for justice for all." Under mounting pressure, the country's government issues an official apology, promises reforms, and announces new training programs for immigration staff. But Alice pushes for more. She participates in negotiations to establish an independent oversight body to monitor immigration practices. The turning point comes with Alice's speech at the UN General Assembly. She concludes her address with these words, "This incident has proven that when society comes together, we can change the system. Let us unite for justice." In the final scene, Alice is seen working on a report for the next conference. On the wall behind her hangs an article titled, "Airport Incident Leads to Reforms." Alice smiles, knowing her fight was not in vain.